If Diablo 4 Season 1 isn't doing it for you, here are some alternatives to try. We have included some ARPG adjacent titles such as Halls of Torment, one that pushes those nostalgia buttons in having a visual resemblance to Diablo 1, but is a vampire survivor style roguelite title where you're slaughtering masses of enemies just like in Diablo, where in the short 2 months plus since its early access release, this has an astonishing 10,000 Steam reviews and an overwhelmingly positive rating. Let's move on to a controversial one, shall we? Wolcen, Lords of Mayhem, has been rubbing people the wrong way ever since its release, since it was, and according to some reports, is still rather buggy. But on the flip side, things do seem to have improved somewhat over the past 3 years, with plenty of examples of people having a good time with this game. It is set in an almost Warhammer 40k-like dark fantasy world, only filled with monsters and demons rather than alien species, where you are recruited by the Order of the Templars while fleeing a death penalty which kicks off the adventure. It has quite a freeform skill system that allows you to experiment with different builds and is a pretty solid entry, although the recommendation would be to look out for a sale since it has been as steeply discounted as 80% off and might be worth a look at that price point. Singapore-made Ghostlore released out of early access earlier this year, which was kind of strange even then, since the entire game was fully playable and completable in the initial launch, but here we are with the canonically complete version. The most unique part of it is that it draws upon Southeast Asian mythology and culture, with enemies like hungry ghosts, Chinese hopping vampires, and Indonesian banana tree spirits / vampires in Pontianaks, where it also has a number of atypical character classes to choose from, with an interesting skill-linked progression system with icons on the board, so if you want something very unique, give this one a go. Another early access title worth checking out is Alaloth Champions of the Four Kingdoms, one that self-describes as Baldur's Gate meets Dark Souls, combining the epic story and world exploration of a CRPG with more action-oriented combat. While there is a stamina meter to manage in combat, it is on the more forgiving end of things and is not Dark Souls difficult, where the action is good and the visuals are as well. An older title on the list is The Incredible Adventures of Van Helsing Final Cut, being the compilation of 3 games that goes back to 2013 in The Incredible Adventures of Van Helsing 1, 2, and 3. So the Final Cut version has plenty of content. You'll play as the legendary vampire hunter Van Helsing with a ghostly companion named Lady Katarina by your side, where she does help in combat and acts as a foil to our protagonist. You have to save the land of Bogovia by taking on various quests, helping the locals and killing tons of monsters. There are 6 character classes to choose from that are quite different, even having 4-player co-op support and is fun with friends. The Final Cut version does increase the level cap to 100 and adds an endgame as well, and is pretty underrated all things considered. Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, where Book of Demons is basically Diablo 1 in terms of story, setting, characters, and even classes, where you are adventuring in the catacombs beneath an old cathedral that eventually leads into hell and a confrontation with the archdemon. So stop me if you've heard this one before. I do like the papercraft look and has some tweaks to the formula, where your character can only move along the lanes, and how targeting and clicking on enemies work is interesting, with a deck building system and even ways to customize your play session being a must try in my opinion. We have had a number of survival action RPGs recently which have done tremendously well, with Tribes of Midgard being the title of interest here, where this Norse mythology themed entry is very popular and more importantly has been getting constant support since its release in July 2021, so that's about 2 years and counting, with the 2nd anniversary update just releasing on this past Monday and the previous major update titled Valhalla releasing in April this year, where it continues to have a strong player base with about 2,800 concurrent players on Steam as of recording. Another excellent indie game to check out is the Slormancer, which has been in early access for more than 2 years at this point, but it has sold decently well and has been getting constant updates, the latest of which was on July 10th, so it is by no means a dead game. This is a pretty classic action RPG with warrior, archer, and mage archetypes, with the expected crafting and loot systems which are pretty in-depth, not to mention build variety and skill tree progression. Pixel art may not be for everyone, but I do like how this game looks, where slaughtering masses of enemies feels great. I'm expecting this game to get a bump in popularity once it releases out of early access, which should be soon, since the most recent update added Act 5, which is the final story act, so get in while you can since the price is expected to go up. Another older title of interest is Victor Vran, one which is similar to The Incredible Adventures of Van Helsing covered earlier, but where you play as a demon instead of vampire hunter. It does, however, have that similar grimdark European mythology-inspired setting in the environments and enemies, where there are plenty of weapons to choose from hammers to scythes and even shotguns, where the classless progression can be pretty novel as compared to Diablo. There are also more mobility options here, since you can jump, which makes exploration more interesting, where combat in this is fun and even has co-op support.
Riftbreaker Ashley, please report.
A new entry to the list is the Riftbreaker from 2021, a base builder meets action RPG that was Vampire Survivors before that was a thing, since you end up slaughtering masses of enemies. The base building part does make it different from Diablo, but where the real-time hack and slash and shoot action feels similarly satisfying, even more so when your turrets and defenses are firing on all cylinders with you in the middle of the carnage. Since its release in 2021, they have released 2 paid DLCs which added even more content, where the variety of biomes and objectives makes this a joy. On paper, the most successful indie action RPG is Chronicron, another pixel art entry that might not look that impressive, but don't let the visuals fool you, this is one of the best and most in-depth games out there. There are a bunch of things going on with skill progression, crafting, enchantment and transmutation, where the screen can get to an overwhelming state of explosions and bright lights. But by the time you get to that extent, you will be comfortable enough with the game, but the endgame content is pretty substantial as well. Ever since Amazon brought Lost Ark to Western audiences, it has had a pretty impressive showing, since this free-to-play MMO action RPG has a ton of content where the player numbers are holding up, which makes it worth a look. The more MMO elements does make it have more in common with Diablo 4, but where Korean developers have been honing their craft in this exact space, going back to games like MU Online and Lineage. It does run into your typical MMO pay-to-win BS, but hey, that's par for the course for this particular business model, given that it is free-to-play and has constant updates. But getting those out of the way, it's a solid action title that is pretty fun with a variety of classes and powerful abilities at your disposal. I think that this would be best with some friends, and only if you choose to ignore the more competitive aspects of the game, where playing this as a pseudo single-player campaign style title should give you many hours of fun. A super stylish cyberpunk action RPG is The Ascent, one that is set in an intriguing cyberpunk world where a mega corporation has collapsed and opposing forces rush in to fill that power vacuum, where your character is caught up in the middle of it all. There is more shooting as compared to Diablo, even having a cover system, but where there's plenty of loot, upgrades and augmentations as well. Be warned that it has a really slow start, with the equivalent of killing rats in sewers, but the world and action is certainly worth experiencing. There have been approximately 12,000 Warhammer games, where among that number, Warhammer 40k Inquisitor Martyr stands out as the action RPG of the lot, being much better than its Warhammer fantasy counterpart titled Chaos. In typical 40k fashion, you play as an Inquisitor, carrying out the Emperor's will, purging the heretics and the forces of chaos. They've released a whole bunch of DLC, which is unnecessary in my opinion, where the core game is pretty good, with the additional character class in the Sister of Battle maybe being worth your time. They did also release a standalone title named Warhammer 40k Inquisitor Prophecy, where you play as a tech priest battling Tyranids that is pretty good as well, so you cannot really go wrong with either choice, where an interesting side note is that this is from the developer of The Incredible Adventures of Van Helsing mentioned earlier, being a more refined version of that. Our final Diablo-like title that is a little different from what you would expect is V Rising, a vampire-themed isometric survival crafting action RPG that is fantastic, but where I can see how the base building and survival aspect might turn some people off. You play as a recently awakened vampire, weak after being starved for blood after a long time, having to hunt and rebuild your empire to its former glory. You have to venture out at night to hunt and prey on villagers, while gathering your strength and biding your time in the day. And while this is no Valheim in terms of popularity, it is not too shabby either, having done very well for its developers. It has been getting constant updates, with it currently peaking at about 5,000 concurrent players as of recording, so there is a community here and might be of interest. One of my favourite action RPGs from back in the day was Titan Quest, providing a worthy and different enough alternative to Diablo at the time, where I might still have a box copy of it somewhere, where THQ Nordic / the Embracer Group has made it available on Steam with the Anniversary Edition. It's an adventure through mythology where you're taking on various creatures from all over the world, but the class system in this is the most interesting part, allowing you to specialize in one or to mash any two together. When it was revived in 2016, they even released new DLC in Ragnarok in 2017, Atlantis in 2019 and Eternal Embers in 2021, adding more stuff to the game more than 10 years after the fact, although the most recent financial troubles at Embracer has got me concerned about the future of the franchise, but as it stands, it is still a great experience. Honestly, I do still think that Torchlight 2 holds up as one of the best action RPGs of all time, taking its place among the pantheon which includes games like Diablo 2, where at the time, this game was so much better than the original. Some background info here, since Runic Games comprised of ex-Blizzard North developers who were the people that made Diablo 2, so the pedigree certainly paid off, where the more cartoony look does hide quite an impressive title. The class variety and skills are not your typical fantasy archetypes, which makes it interesting, with various quality of life improvements like a pet that could sell vendor trash for you being of note at the time. While Torchlight 3 and Torchlight Infinite exist, these were made by other developers, with the latter's free-to-play model being of concern, so I would still recommend that you stick with this one. One of the most impressive but long in development action RPGs is Last Epoch, having been in early access since 2019, but we are rapidly approaching the 1.0 release since the developers do seem to be wrapping things up. This has a time-travelling premise in which you're able to adventure in various locations and time periods, which provides quite the refreshing amount of variety, all in service of a grand quest to battle against the Void. The developers are reworking Act 1 so that it lines up with their current vision of the game through early access, so taking a final pass through the entire game is the logical step towards a 1.0 release, where I think that this is reasonably priced for an action RPG with this amount of content, so pick it up if interested. To this day, Grim Dawn remains one of the best action RPGs ever, and it's no surprise really, since the developer of this, Crate Entertainment, were formed from the ashes of Iron Law Entertainment, who made Titan Quest covered earlier, and in many ways this game is similar, especially in the class system and skill trees. However, rather than mythology based, this is more classic Diablo in terms of enemies and setting, but did take the foundation of Titan Quest and build upon that. It had a ton of support with 3 DLCs adding plenty of content and longevity, not to mention community mods extending the life of this even further. Interestingly, the developers went on to make the Banished-like survival city builder Father's Frontier, which is currently in early access, so it is quite the pivot, but their excellence shines through since the reception to that is great as well. And of course, the elephant in the room would be Path of Exile from New Zealand-based Grinding Gear Games, being the free-to-play action RPG, where it has plenty of content with an insane skill tree as well, and with momentum building for Path of Exile 2, which is going to be linked to the original. There's no better time to jump in with more of the best indie games of the year in this video.